Oh, well, it looks like I was wrong. Although, you know, those numbers don't. I don't know. I mean, it's not. It's really not clear to me if this includes the Oracle numbers because I mean, those were five companies that I wouldn't have suspected would have only spent 4 billion in data centers. I would have expected it to be more. They spent on them between the five of them because those were big names in the tech sector that were building data centers, in anticipation of the AI. But no, it turns out that that was my guess, but I was speculating at that point, but it turns out I was wrong about something apparently, or Nvidia just isn't reporting it yet on these quarter one numbers, or maybe they're deciding to. Plus, I'm asking the question like, is this like how the fuck is it that we're all the way at this point in the middle of May and really at the end of May, and Nvidia is reporting quarter one numbers? I mean, to me, we're almost at the end of quarter two. You know, like that would be June because that would be the sixth month of the year. You know, like that would make sense. But anyways, I don't really know the fullness of this, but yeah, Nvidia's corporation reported a strong fiscal quarter one. You know, they surpassed the numbers and the revenue, but not by as much as I was expecting. Their impressive performance is well. I mean, yeah. One of the good parts about the Nvidia stock is just that the earnings have been rather, impressive. They've been good. It's this is a company that's moving in such a way where although the price to earnings ratio is a bit skewed, like people are paying more. The price to earnings ratio isn't where it's ideal. It's moving in the right direction because Nvidia just keeps basically printing money. You know, Nvidia's performance in quarter one underscores its leadership in the AI gaming sector. So this is the earnings call transcript. Uh, the company's data center revenue, which I mentioned, the data center revenue is the part that really matters. It reached 39 billion, marking a 70. Well, see, this is the problem with these numbers. See, they just got 40 billion from Oracle, so that's wrong. Like that means there are shit, man. Their next quarter, whenever they report those, are going to be impressive. Then maybe they're projecting that out to being part of quarter two. I don't know, but they're that's already off by a billion if that's the case, because that's a fucking $40 billion investment from Oracle in data centers. So but no, I mean the revenue that they're reporting is 41 billion, up 69% year over year. The earnings per share are now 96 cents per one per every dollar invested, which was above the forecast of 93. The data center revenue that they're reporting is 39 billion, which is up 73%. And their gaming revenue was 3.8 billion, up 48% sequentially. Nvidia's actual EPS of 96 cents per share, is represented a 3.23% surprise over the forecasted 93. Revenue also exceeded expectations by a good 800 million, highlighting the company's ability to capitalize on market trends and maintain strong financial health. The company is moving in the right direction. Basically, the price to earnings reports are the ratio is a bit less than ideal, but it's moving in the right direction because every time the earnings call comes in, it turns out this company has made a good chunk of money, and that's just kind of the norm for Nvidia. It tends to surge every time there's an earnings report, and then it it can pull back a bit. Looking ahead, Nvidia expects quarter two revenue to be approximately 45 billion plus or minus 2%. The company is preparing for modest sequential growth across its platforms with a focus on expanding AI infrastructure and enterprise solution. However, it anticipates a decrease in Chinese data center revenue due to geopolitical factors. With a beta of 2.1, investors should note its stock's higher volatility compared to the market. For deeper insights into Nvidia's valuation and growth prospect, invest in, well, yeah, whatever. You know, I mean, yeah, I don't want to pay for, something. I mean, when we already are financial advisors. Potential decrease in Chinese data center revenue due to geopolitical tensions. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the risks. Economic uncertainties could affect the demand for NVIDIA products. Competition. See, first of all, competition in AI and in the AI space, it practically doesn't exist. And in the gaming market, it practically doesn't exist either. I mean, yes, if we want to get exceedingly technical, AMD exists. Of course, we can grudgingly acknowledge that reality, but to pretend that they're on par with Nvidia or that they're able to deliver the same performance that's on par with Nvidia is just, it's not a reality. And the over look, I mean, the truth of the matter is it's a bit complicated. I mean, gamers these days are a bit budget constrained. They're a bit, you're hearing more and more of this in the gaming space. It's becoming more typical for people to talk about it, but a lot of people can't necessarily afford, these kinds of price increases that are happening. And so it's a little bit more iffy. You're starting to see a lot more competition that's being edged out by AMD because of that. They're becoming the budget video card company. And you know what? If I had any real sensible financial advice to AMD, is that if you can't beat Nvidia in the high end space, you should carve out an exceptional price for performance GPU segment until you can build up the infrastructure to actually be competitive with them again. And that's gonna take time and a lot of spending. And you're 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 not just losing because of the fact that you're not able to match them in terms of performance. They've just got an entire infrastructure now that helps developers out and everything. you know, Nvidia, I mean, AMD would have to develop all of that themselves, and that's going to take time, money, and man hours. Supply chain challenges that may affect production and delivery timelines. During the earnings calls, analysts focused on the impact of the Chinese export controls and Nvidia's strategic initiatives in AI and enterprise markets. Discussions also covered the company's working in compute technologies, providing insights to its competitive advantages. I mean, everybody keeps talking about the supposed, competition that comes from Nvidia for Nvidia in these spaces, but I mean, if you're a gamer at all, you know this stuff. Like, this is not news to you that AMD is just not, competitive when 90% of people pick it. I mean, yeah, there's that last 10%, but, is it normal for there to exist, like, how many markets is it the case where there's two competing companies and one company has 90% of the market share, whereas the other has like the last 10 grudging percent of it? I mean, it's pretty clear that Nvidia has a near monopoly in this space. It's not quite, but it's nearly complete. you know, and really, I mean, people only the only reason why anybody picks an AMD card is for budgetary reasons. So it's either they can't afford an Nvidia card, or the alternative, which is that they're a more rational human being who just sees the price, the performance differentials between the two, and says that it's not that much, and so they decide to get the biggest bang for their buck, and they spend the money somewhere else, or they just invest it instead, which would be the sensible thing to do. I mean, I can't blame them if they're that type, and it would make sense. And so the basically, they just gave us the summary of it, and now we're looking at it. Uh, oh, uh, so I'm looking over the report. Exceeding our outlook on what we provide to be a challenging operating environment. Data center revenue 39 billion. So it had an impressive quarter, and our portfolio's up. Did I mention congratulations to Epic Games for what happened in the Apple lawsuit? And I say this as an Apple shareholder, or at least I don't own Apple shares directly, but I stand to, because our financial accounts and as a family will eventually become at least partially my inheritance. At some point. So, technically my mom owns, would be like accurate terminology, but my mom owns this with the express understanding that this is going to go to her children someday. She's not looking to spend this, is what I'm saying. This is money that she intends to leave behind for her for her kids, basically. Blackwell is still early in its cycle. Software optimizations have performed its performance. Is you know, why wasn't this in the summary? Jesus, you would think that that would be in the summary. It improved its performance by 1.5% in the last month alone. We expect to continue improving the performance of Blackwell through its operational life. We have done with Hopper and Ampere. For example, we increased the interference performance of Hopper. We increased the inference performance of Hopper by 4 times over 2 years. This is the benefit of Nvidia's programmable CUDA architecture and rich ecosystem. I mean, that's what I've been talking about. That rich ecosystem makes them very competitive. It means that AMD would have a lot to build up. To even meaningfully come into competition with that. At this the pace and scale of AI factory deployments are accelerating, with nearly 100 Nvidia powered AI factories. Apparently I got this call wrong. I misguessed on the basis of the Oracle call, but I don't see why. I mean, the how is it that they're not reporting the Oracle numbers here? For AI, this is all stuff that it would have been good to know in the summary. I mean, but no, it's apparently information that's not in the summary. I can't believe this. Lots of this stuff that's in here, and I'm not reading it out loud unless it really, really jumps out as, you know. Oh, in console gaming, the unveiled Nintendo Switch 2 leverages NVIDIA's neural rendering and AI technologies, including next generation custom RTX GPUs with DLS technology to deliver a giant leap in gaming performance to millions of players worldwide. Nintendo has shipped, yeah, 150,000 Switch consoles to date, so they went with Nvidia again as a partnership between these two, between Nintendo and Nvidia. So those partnerships exist. It's an indirect way of benefiting from Nintendo, I guess. This. Jensen Hung came, or I don't know how to pronounce his name. Basically came in and said, "Thanks, Colette. We've had a busy, productive year. Let me share my perspective on some topics we're frequently asked on export control. China is one of the largest AI markets and springboard to global success. Today, however, the 50. Let me make sure these numbers are right. Yeah, 50 billion China market is effectively closed to U.S. industry. The H20 export ban ended our Hopper data center business in China. We cannot reduce Hopper further to comply. As a result, we are taking a multi-billion-dollar write-off on inventory that can't be sold or repurposed. We are exploring limited ways to compete, but Hopper is no longer an option. China's AI moves on with or without US chips. It has to compute to train and deploy advanced models. The question is not whether China will have AI, it already does. The question is whether one of the world's largest AI markets will run on American platforms. Shielding Chinese chip makers from US competition only strengthens them abroad and weakens America's position. Export restrictions have spurred China's innovation and scale. The AI race is not just about chips, it's about which stack the world runs on, and that stack continues to include 6G and quantum. US global infrastructure leadership is at stake. Well, that's what I would expect you to say, and I would expect you to frame this one, Jensen. I mean, that's how I, you know, although I am an investor in the company, I'm just saying, as a person who actually has critical thinking skills, you know, the U.S. has its based policies on the U.S. has based its policies on the assumption that China cannot make AI chips. What? I look, the Chinese are fucking smarter than people in the U.S. give them credit for, and wiser, much wiser. As a people, they've made some boneheaded decisions. They're as a country, they've made some mistakes. Yes, it's true, but hasn't everybody? And they learn from experience, and like they observe too, to a considerable extent, so they learn. They look for gaps that they can exploit and take advantage of, and who can blame them? That's what anybody does. you know uh, you're just watching me comb over this, to see. If I were on this call, I think my one question to Jensen would be like, given the reality of all these tariffs and everything, wait, like, are you as a company willing to commit to not giving money to the Republican Party, or at least to its presidential candidates, if nothing else? You know, are you willing to go to take that risk and pull out of that strategic betting on both sides, because you've got one side that is pushing for policies that are terrible for the company. I mean, let me look and see. What Nvidia has donated. From the looks of it, it actually looks like they already are good. I mean, they know where they know where their toast are buttered. Nvidia employee. Oh, well, these are their employee donations, but what about the company itself? Oh God, Nvidia. I don't think it actually does. So we have its. Oh wow. So they're pretty staunchly in the Democratic column. I did not know that. That's well, that at least gets me to the point where if I have any criticism of Nvidia now going forward, it's probably going to be a little bit softer. Ugh. I'm not one of those people that comes at my own side of the aisle as hard, or harder. There are people who, when you broadly agree with them, you know, and then you disagree with them about that little tiny fraction of something, they come at you so much harder than they would somebody that agrees with them like 98% of the time. Or so they come at somebody that agrees with them 98% of the time harder than they would somebody that agrees with them maybe, 2% of the time, just because they want that 100% from anybody that's that close to them, and so they will rip you apart just because you disagree with them about that last little 2%. Yeah, I'm not one of those types.